And as we continue our special coverage, I want to invite to the program right now polls analyst Philippe Fournier. He is also the editor-in-chief at 338 Canada and a political commentator for L'Actualité. Philippe, good to see you.
Good evening, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Well, you know, I'm really glad that you're here because the numbers have been so interesting to watch, the poll numbers here right throughout the summer. Because, you know, as of the new year, we saw Liberal support slipping, but it seemed to take a very deep dive come the summer. Conservatives have made some huge gains, including a new poll that came out tonight. So as we begin our discussion right now, I'm going to ask you, if you will, to paint a picture for us as to where the party is right now, the Conservative Party, in terms of popularity coast to coast to coast.
Well, if we look at the numbers from since the beginning of the year, we could see that the Liberals and the Conservatives were mostly tied. The Conservatives were leading by 3 or 4 points, but really it is during the summer, in August, that we saw a dramatic shift. And as you said, polls released today, double-digit leads from coast to coast for the Conservatives, including leads in Atlantic Canada, where the Liberals, of course, did very well in the last 3 elections. Double-digit lead in Ontario, where the Liberals owe their victory to Ontario voters. And we start also to see a small shift. It's modest, but it seems to be real in Quebec, where the Conservatives usually get from 16 to 17% of the vote. Now we've seen 6 or 7 polls that have the Conservatives above the 20% mark. Yeah. And that would translate into seat gains. And so right now, if an election were held today with those numbers, the most likely scenario would be a strong minority or a short majority for the Conservatives.
Well, and certainly that's something we're watching very closely. You know, I want to break up those numbers a little bit because you mentioned some key battlegrounds here, not only for Conservatives, but really for Liberals, because these are regions of the country where the Liberals have been able to build government. But before we get there, I do want to address another issue, and that has to do with the trend line here, because I think it's safe to say this is not just a blip, because we have seen poll after poll from different firms basically replicate the same lead for the Conservative Party. Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say. However, I would also preface this by saying these are summer polls. Not that they're less reliable, but voters tend to stay away from politics during the summertime. And so perhaps as we go into the fall, we will see a tightening of those numbers. But you're totally right. We've seen, I think, 7 different firms measuring substantial leads for the Conservatives. So it doesn't seem to be just an outlier. It's a massive amount of polling from the best polling firms in the country, from Léger, the Angus Reid Institute, Abacus Data, with several polls in August and September. And the Liberals right now will have an uphill climb to fight back.
Yeah, uphill as we count down to the return of Parliament in a couple of weeks' time. But, you know, Philippe, if this is more than just a summer affair, I think that's essentially what the Conservatives want. They don't want this just to be a summer love affair. They want this to be the start of a long-lasting relationship. Let's go back to some of the regions that you prefaced there. Again, important regions for both major parties, for the Liberals and Conservatives, and I should also mention very important for the NDP as well, but certainly important for those two. They have fought in many ridings, 1 and 2. Let's begin in Ontario, seat-rich Ontario. Where do things exactly stand for the Conservative Party?
Well, if you take Toronto and the GTA, we talk about those regions in every election. That's 55 ridings. And the Liberals in the past 2 elections have won 49 of them. And so that's your victory right there for Justin Trudeau. And the numbers right now have tilted so much towards the Conservatives that it starts to bleed into the GTA and even some parts of maybe just outer Toronto. And so just a few points more for the Conservatives could flip as many as 30 to 40 seats. And 30 to 40 seats flipping from the red team to the blue team, well, that's a Conservative victory.
Is that just in the 905, but also in the 416, and to people at home, the 416 being the area code for Toronto proper, the 905 for the suburbs and the outer suburbs surrounding Toronto.
Well, here's the thing with the 416 Toronto proper is that the Liberals won in many places with a split vote. And so if the Liberals go down, the NDP is stable, the Conservatives go up, suddenly you have 3-way races, and those are very hard to predict, but they could slip away from a sitting government after almost 9 or 10 years. And so also we have to look at the regions of Niagara, Hamilton, those very hard-fought battles that right now, if you look at the projections, the Liberals would probably lose those regions right now. And without those regions, they don't have a government. There's no path to government without those regions.
Okay, let's move from Ontario to Atlantic Canada now, because again, a very solid Liberal stronghold in the past few elections. How are things sitting right now in those four provinces?
From a complete sweep in 2015, 32 out of 32 for the Liberals, 28 seats in 2019, 26 seats in 2021, and now we're starting to see the effect of the wear and tear of time. Of course, the carbon tax, very unpopular right now in parts of Atlantic Canada. The numbers that we have seen in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick have tightened dramatically, enough to flip maybe 6 or more, 7 more seats. And so it's not a dramatic change, but the path to victory for the Conservatives, the path to reach 170 seats, you need those additional seats in Atlantic Canada. If there's a split in Atlantic Canada, it makes that much harder for the Liberals.
Now, of course, the Conservative National Convention being hosted in Quebec City. Let's now talk about Quebec, because the last numbers I was looking that I saw basically shows what, a statistical tie between amongst the Bloc Québécois, the Liberals, and now the Conservatives?
The Conservatives are inching up. I'm not ready to put them in the same category as the Bloc and the Liberals, but we've seen the Liberals in the mid-30s in the past 7 years in Quebec, and now it's the high 20s. And that number will cost Liberals many seats if it holds until the next election. But we have to remember, and I'm looking forward to see what kind of speeches they will give here, because in Quebec, the number one opponent to the Conservatives, it's not the Liberals, it's the Bloc Québécois. You look at the seats that the Conservatives are trying to win, and most of them are the Bloc Québécois. In Quebec City, in the Saguenay regions, perhaps even in the eastern townships and down the St. Lawrence, those are mostly Bloc Québécois seats. And it's not a coincidence that you saw Pierre Poilievre starting to call the carbon tax the Trudeau-Blanchet tax. Right?
And I'm sorry to jump in. Very interesting. We'll continue the conversation as the convention goes on. Let's now bring you to the convention as it begins in earnest with the singing of the national anthem.